Hey there guys, today we're taking a look at a system recently released by GMKtec, and that is the GMKtec M7 Pro. What makes this system really interesting is the fact that it is one of the cheapest, if not currently the cheapest system you can get on the market today that has an OCuLink port. Now this is certainly an interesting development, though keep in mind that the hardware in here is a lot more interesting than what even that front-facing OCuLink port would lead you to believe. But OCuLink also has some problems currently in the market that I do want to address later on. Of course, let's talk about the specific hardware configuration that this system comes with. This, of course, is rocking a very interesting chip. You might be noticing the sticker there that says Ryzen 9 on there, and it does have a pretty unique chip that you don't really see normally in a lot of systems. It is the Ryzen 9 Pro 6950H. This is essentially the Ryzen Pro variant of the 6900HX. So a Zen 3 Plus CPU with RDNA 2 graphics. Keep in mind though that this isn't the only system being released in the M7 series. This is the Pro variant. That means that there is actually a non-Pro version. Some of the big differences in terms of how these systems are configured is that the Ryzen 7 here is the Ryzen 7 6850H. So you're looking at a slight CPU clock speed difference, and on the GPU side, you end up losing 200 megahertz. And at least in the system that I've configured here, it really only comes with 16 gigabytes of memory. Of course, you can get this system configured as a bare bones unit, and that actually does end up meaning that this is the cheapest way to get a mini PC with an OCuLink port. And this is probably the system to keep an eye out for if that's something that matters to you, because the slight clock differences on the CPU aren't really going to make all that much of a difference in terms of gaming. And if you're going to be using OCuLink, you really don't care about the iGPU performance. And especially if you get the bare bones model, you can put as much memory as you want in there. Of course, I recommend going with 32 gigabytes no matter what. In 2024, 32 gigabytes is really just going to make your computing experience all the more better, especially if you're trying to game. But because if you're just trying to use these systems as mini PCs, the performance is going to be pretty similar to the two of them. We're just going to keep focusing in on the Ryzen 9 version. So let's actually pop these systems open and take a look at what's inside here and just how easy it would be to upgrade. Now, I completely missed filming taking off the plastic cover here, but it is extremely easy to get off, and it actually makes it easier to show you the diagram in here. It pretty much just tells you to twist off the plastic cover and it'll pop off really easily. You have these 4 screws that are accessible, and this really just shows how decent of a size the fan that is on here actually is. And once we have all the screws out, it is very easy to take out. We just pop this off. Keep in mind you do have the fan cable there, and it's nice to see that we have full access to everything, and we do get 2 M.2 slots here, so you get easily upgradable storage, and of course the RAM is very easily accessible. Another thing to keep in mind is that the fan that the system has on here is a very nice quality one. I'm not exactly sure how easily it would be to find a replacement fan for it, but it does seem to be a far more standard size that you will more than likely be able to find a replacement unit on AliExpress. I have had trouble before with mini PCs that have had fans fail and just finding it impossible to find replacement parts for them. This being a far more standard design, I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to find a replacement unit, but I'll have to investigate that later on. Of course, the big selling point of these two systems is that OCuLink port. So let's talk about OCuLink right now. One thing I want to say off the bat is I do not like the fact that it is a front-facing OCuLink port. This is going to make a OCuLink setup a lot more cluttered than it realistically has to be. And that brings me to the main reason that I am particularly not a fan of the current iterations of OCuLink docks. OCuLink, the way that it works is a little finicky right now, and it's very DIY. For one, as the sticker shows you here, you need to have your OCuLink port and everything plugged in before you turn on the system, and you have to have the OCuLink dock with the graphics card already running before you turn on the system. This is a bit of a inconvenience because if you're someone that's used to just turning on your computer and everything working, having to go through this extra step of turning on an OCuLink setup before you turn on your main system adds an extra annoyance to just using your computer day to day. But that's not a complete deal breaker. One of the biggest deal breakers for me at least, is the fact that OCuLink setups are kind of very ugly. It has to do with the fact that your graphics card is going to be exposed, as well as your power supply is going to be exposed, and you're going to have cables running all over the place. Even if you have a modular power supply, you're still going to have the main GPU power cable coming out, and unless you're going to get a custom cable set to a specific length, it's in general just going to end up looking pretty rough. If you look at most OCuLink setups online, you'll see that this is kind of a problem. Both Minis Forum and B-Link have tried to target this, but if you're someone that's trying to go for the cheapest possible OCuLink setup, you're going to run into the problem of things looking very jank. There really just isn't any solution on the market right now that fully gives you that eGPU experience that you would get if you were using USB 4, which the system does actually have a USB 4 port. You can use a USB, or rather a Thunderbolt dock with a graphics card, but Thunderbolt at this point is so old that the bandwidth is going to really limit the types of graphics cards that you could use on here. OCuLink is a better solution, but not by much. So it becomes a situation of, if you want power, if you want performance, OCuLink is the way to go, but it's a lot more jank. While if you want a more elegant solution, USB 4 is there, but keep in mind that you're limiting the amount of performance that you could realistically have in terms of a graphics card. While the OCuLink setup is certainly interesting, it isn't going to be the only reason that you buy a system like this. So if we actually take a look at the gaming performance of the built-in iGPU, we can see some pretty interesting results. So the first game that I took a look at was Black Myth Wukong, running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. We are using an FSR at the performance preset, and we are also using FSR frame generation, and the performance that we're getting out of this is actually pretty decent. Keep in mind though that we are using frame generation, and frame generation tends to recommend that you have an above 60 FPS average before you use it. It does tend to introduce some more latency, so the higher your FPS is, the better the experience is going to be. But when we're talking about a system that, if it wasn't using FSR and it didn't have frame generation, it would be a lot more inconsistent and a lot more sluggish, this actually ends up being a pretty decent experience. While actually playing the game, I found it to be decent enough, though keep in mind that for a game like this, you're probably going to end up getting pretty frustrated with the level of performance that it's getting, just because of the fact that in certain scenes it's going to be pretty inconsistent, and your latency is going to be a bit higher than what these numbers are actually showing you. Still, frame generation does actually end up helping a lot to smooth out the frame times, so it is consistent. It's just consistently a higher latency than what you would normally have if you were actually getting this level of performance without using frame generation. Now, another game that I was really looking forward to testing out on this system is Rainbow Six Siege, specifically because Rainbow Six Siege actually recently got a pretty major update that fundamentally changed some aspects of the game. By default, it now launches with DirectX 12. This is pretty major because what they ended up doing was getting rid of the Vulkan implementation, and the Vulkan option was always something that was more secondary. The default option was almost always going to be DX11. DX11 is still an option there, but DX12 is new here. So I wanted to try out DX12, but I want to point this out because if you're looking at these numbers and comparing it to any other system that I've tested with this game, keep in mind that that is not running DX12, so they are not comparable one-to-one. DX12 seems to have affected the performance pretty noticeably though, but at the high graphics settings, we're still able to get a decent experience here. But it does seem like if you actually want to maximize your FPS, you're better off going with DirectX 11. And an unforeseen consequence of this new update is the fact that for some reason the main menu seems to run at a sub 30 FPS average that seems to drop down into the 20s pretty frequently. Very, very odd, and definitely needs some patches. And that really seems to be one of the biggest consequences of live service games. They can just suddenly change up on you and the performance could change dramatically, which is why I also like to test out titles like Returnal here that are pretty much mature titles that aren't getting any major updates like that. Unfortunately, it's not exactly a great performer on this system. As you can see here, the 1% lows are pretty disastrous and our FPS average is also struggling. This is one of the heavier benchmarks that we test on this channel, so it's pretty consistent in terms of giving a rough result for these RDNA 2 based iGPUs. Even RDNA 3 tends to struggle, and it's not until you really start to get into RDNA 3.5 that you start to get to the point where you can start turning up the graphics and get this to actually look decent while giving you a decent result. So this is definitely falling in line where we would expect a 6000 series APU to end up landing at. It's certainly not an incredible result, but it is at least not a surprise in either direction. A new benchmark that I'm going to be running is the Counter-Strike 2 benchmark. This is a custom map that someone made for benchmarking reasons, though keep in mind that this is not going to be indicative of the performance if you're trying to play an online match. Since this has to simulate pretty much every aspect of the server, it's really more giving you an indication of what would happen if you were hosting a custom game yourself. But what it does let us do is give some comparative results for future systems that we're going to be taking a look at. And what this also means is that if we get a good result here, that means that if you're playing the game yourself, multiplayer, you're going to get an even better result than this. So this is really just the worst possible case scenario for this system, and it does handle this pretty well. This is of course with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we aren't using FSR because FSR is really not something you should be using in a title like this. Now, the next title that I wanted to take a look at was Tiny Tina's Wonderland. This is running at the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And the level of performance that we're getting here is absolutely great. And for a co-op looter shooter, this is pretty much the best result that you can really ask for, especially for a mini PC like this. And you can tell by the temperatures and everything that the system is not getting hot at all. It's really not making that much noise. And even though we're using 54 watts, it is an overall great result. This is really great to see because systems like the Sur 5 Max and the Sur 6 tend to actually make more noise than this, while giving an even lower result because of the fact that, well, the Sur 5 Max is just a 5800H, and even the Sur 6 with its 6900HX is not running at a TDP that is this high, and it can't cool as well as this. So GMKtec has really impressed me with the cooling solution that they have in this system. And the last title that I wanted to take a look at is Red Dead Redemption 2 here, running with the built-in benchmark. We are using the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset, but we do have the textures set to ultra. And honestly, the level of performance that we're getting out of this is really, really impressive. While it's a older title, it's still visually one of the best looking PC titles on the market, although TAA does kind of make it a little rough to look at in comparison to what you would expect it to, but since we're using FSR, that really doesn't matter anyway. The 1% lows are decent enough, and the FPS average is pretty great. And in general, while actually playing the game, you're going to have a great time since you're really playing this for the single player experience. If you're out there playing Red Dead Online, I really don't know what you're doing, but I hope you're having fun at least. So after trying this system in a wide variety of different situations, I did also try video editing on here, photo editing. All of that works actually really well considering the fact that the iGPU actually has hardware acceleration, so you're able to do a lot of things really well on here. But the level of performance that we get is really impressive, and the most impressive thing to me was just how quiet the system is. When taking a look at Cinebench R23 in particular, we can see that the 6950H is actually the best performing Zen 3 Plus CPU that I've ever taken a look at, having a pretty noticeable gap between the 6900HX. Keep in mind though that you cannot take these numbers as 100% fact just because of the fact that there was a recent update to Windows that actually boosted the performance of pretty much all Ryzen CPUs. Still, it is the current lead that I have in terms of my charts, but I do need to retest everything again to see what the performance differences are going to be like, but that's going to be its own dedicated video, so stay tuned for that. GMKtec really seems to have taken to heart a lot of the major issues they had with cooling on their system, specifically cooling the memory. And this entire design really emphasizes the fact that they learned those lessons, they took it all to heart, and they are giving you a system that is a great performer, it's extremely quiet, and it is the cheapest way on the market right now to get into OCuLink. So I definitely recommend that you check this system out if you're interested in an OCuLink setup, or if you're just looking for a mini PC with decent levels of performance. So I would honestly recommend that you take a look at either one of these systems, really consider what you're doing. If OCuLink is something that you really care about, I would honestly take a look at really the non-pro variant, because you're still going to get great CPU performance. You aren't paying a premium for an iGPU that you're realistically not going to end up utilizing to its max ability. At most, you're only going to be using the media engine in it, and that's going to be identical between the two of them anyway. And in terms of the physical design, they're pretty much identical. Both of them are really easy to get into. Both of them are very easy to upgrade. So if you're looking for a great price on these, I would honestly pick them up bare bones and upgrade them yourself to just exactly what you want. The great thing is that you get the two M.2 slots, so you get the expandability there. You get OCuLink. OCuLink isn't using up an M.2 slot, and it's really overall a great experience. So I hope you found this video interesting or useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested, you can become a channel member for as little as $1 a month, and that does help out. It pretty much goes a long way to helping to keep this channel completely independent and not relying on any major sponsors to run it or anything like that. So if you want to help out, you can become a channel member. If you want to support the coffee, you can also go to the page down below. All of that is appreciated. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys in the next one.